Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up and working with an air conditioning control strategy found within our Motec programming. Now my firmware package, which is a GPRP, the GPR is going to also be the same type of firmware package, supports air conditioning. You may have an OEM type of package with Motec that'll also support air conditioning. Other firmware packages may not. But what we'll cover here is going to be the general control strategy for air conditioning control for most packages available with the Motec. Let's jump in here and take a look at where we can find our air conditioning programming strategy and all the details associated with that. We'll talk about the components we have to have wired in from our Motec to the vehicle, and then talk about our programming that we have to work with in order to make sure that the air conditioning is controlling correctly. So first things first, we're going to go here under our tuning window and jump down here under our setup. Now under setup, we're going to move across from our basic and go here into all calibrate. Under all calibrate, we're going to move in here to our list that we have. This is essentially the overall feature list for my firmware package. And here I'm going to go to the air conditioning option, and then I first have to assign what they're calling request resource. This is going to be the AC arming switch that we push on the dash of the vehicle or on the CAN keypad that's going to turn on the AC functionality. So this is going to be telling the Motec that we want to run our air conditioning, and then it's going to go through a checksum of different parameters. If everything looks good, it'll then activate the AC clutch to turn on the AC compressor, which will then activate the system, and it'll start to charge and it'll start to cool down the vehicle. Now under our request resource, this is pretty straightforward to assign. We just have to go ahead and pick whatever input we've wired a request wire into from the switch that we're assigning. In this case, I'm using a digital input 5, so we're going to go ahead and grab that option. Let's go ahead and grab that for my particular wiring here. Now you may be working with, and as I mentioned before, you may be working with a CAN module. So you might work CAN keypad that could be assigned to the same type of function. We do have some firmware options. These are going to be specific to a vehicle firmware. You have to check with Motec with which specific firmware would be associated to setting up your AC request resource. I'm not going to get into assigning any of the firmware options because I've simply built a jumper harness from my vehicle to this universal package and universal box. So I'm just assigning the actual hard switch from the dash that's present. Now the switch is going to be sending a ground into the Motec, so it's a ground signal in. You may have a switch that sends 12 volt in. It's going to depend on your particular wiring on your vehicle or how you've configured everything. If you're using a digital or an analog input, you do need to understand what you're selecting. So I'm going to go ahead in this case and grab my universal digital input 5, and I'm going to go ahead and save that to the Motec so it understands what's going on. Now the next thing is we have to go here into our request area. That's going to be where we assign the status for our switch and see how everything's working. So we can take a look right now. The request is showing off. So the switch is off in my particular case. And if I turn the switch on, we'd like to see that that status goes to on. So the switch then would be configured correctly. We want to go and make sure that we have our input settings here configured correctly for this switch so that it does function in the on and off status following what we actually press on the switch in the vehicle. So looking here, the type, I'm going to set this to normal. This is for a normal on-off type of switch. There's also an option for toggling, so that would be for a different configuration. I'm going to choose normal. That's the way the switch is going to be working for my particular vehicle here. Pull-up is going to be on. Now I'm sending a ground signal in. So one leg of the switch somewhere in my OEM wiring is going into a ground source. The other leg of the switch, when I press the switch, that output is going to the Motec, and that's going to be grounding the pin, which is our universal digital input 5. So under the pull-up control, we're going to make sure that that's on. So ground coming into the Motec, we need the pull-up on. If we're sending 12 volt in, the pull-up would be off. Now the active edge here, we're going to leave on falling edge. So falling edge would be for a ground signal in. If you're sending 12 volt in, then you would have activation edge set to a rising edge. So it'd be a little bit different in our configurations here. Now the threshold for it to count from going from off to on will be 2 volts in this case. We can see in the off status right now it's about 4 volt, and when we go ahead and turn the switch on, it should ground the circuit. We should see the voltage drops to approximately 0 volt or ground, and then the threshold to determine if it's switching on or off will be 2 volt, and the hysteresis is a volt. That's fine. The debalance, we'll leave it at a 0 millisecond. So that should all be good for our settings. Let's go ahead and test our switch right now to make sure it's functional. So if I turn the switch on, Now we see it goes on. We do see that voltage goes to approximately 0 volt. Turn the switch off, we see it goes back. So the switch functionality is correct. We don't need to do anything further here with our request switch configuration. But the next thing we need to consider is our clutch resource. This is going to be what turns on the AC clutch on the AC compressor to actually engage the compressor for it to start to build pressure in the system and then start to allow the charging to happen and the cooling effect from the air conditioning. So the clutch resource here is going to be specific where we're wiring it and how we've wired things. Now, when we're talking about a AC clutch, we typically have an AC clutch relay in our vehicle. The average AC clutch will pull about 3 to 4 amps in terms of how much amperage draw it's going to pull from its source. We have to think about this when we're configuring our output and what output we choose from the Motec.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.